So as chair of the Federal Committee of the Plant Conservation Alliance, I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Emily Coffey, PhD, Vice President of the Conservation and Research at Atlanta Botanical Garden, Miss Carrie Radcliffe, Conservation Partnerships Manager at Atlanta Botanical Garden, and Sarah Norris, Conservation Partnerships Assistant at Atlanta Botanical Garden. So as you heard, all of our presenters today do come from the ABG, but in addition, Emily is co-chair of the Southeastern Plant Conservation Alliance, and Carrie Radcliffe is co-chair for the Southeastern Plant Conservation Alliance. Sarah Norris provides program coordination to the Southeast PCA and the regional species of greatest conservation need. So please join us in welcoming Carrie, Emily, and Sarah today, who are talking to us about the Southeastern Plant Conservation Alliance and the development of the nation's first regional species of greatest conservation need for plants. Okay, take it away.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Patricia. We really appreciate this opportunity to chat with you all today, and thank you for the invitation. So, as Patricia said, I'm Emily Coffey, and I'm talking today a little bit about, I'm gonna give you all a bit of background on the Southeastern Plant Conservation Alliance's formation and how the Atlanta Botanical Garden has been involved. Next slide. So the mission of the Southeastern Center for Conservation, which is held at the Atlanta Botanical Garden, is to promote innovative strategies and partnerships to conserve imperiled plants and their natural communities. And the Southeastern Center for Conservation staff work really hard to advance the science of conservation through research collaborations and native species recovery programs. ABG's plant conservation collections and fieldwork focus on propagation of underrepresented endangered plant groups and the restoration and management of their habitats. Next slide. And this is a schema that will help sort of understand how this high level of botanical and horticultural expertise and the staff work together to be able to incorporate both in situ and ex situ conservation. So this schema is meant to show sort of the entire breadth of the different conservation activities that occur at the Atlanta Botanical Gardens Southeastern Center. And we can see that we do monitoring and modeling, we have conservation ecology, restoration, both large and small scale, experimental augmentation, our conservation collections, which are central to our in situ, our ex situ work, our seed banking, cryopreservation, tissue culture, and of course our conservation genetics. But at the center of all of this is our network and partnerships. And this is really what we're going to be talking about today, because it's this networking that is so critical to being able to actually make significant impacts on conservation of rare plants across the United States. Next slide, please. So what we can see here is that the SEPCA, and this is sort of indicating and showing, you know, how our in situ work, our ex situ work, and our networks all work together. And we have an international consortium that a network that we run, but today we're focusing on the Southeastern Plant Conservation Alliance. And this is a diverse and inclusive partnership of professionals that bridges the gaps between local and national efforts while collaborating to prevent the loss and restore plant diversity. One of the organization's goals is to support the development of the Regional Species of Greatest Conservation Need, or RSGCN list, for plants, and to inform and support conservation strategies, decision-making, and sustainable actions for rare and threatened plants. Identification of these highly imperiled and data deficient plant species will inform development of and inclusion of plants in the 2025 State Wildlife Action Plan revisions, which is really exciting to all of us here in the Southeast. And we're trying to identify additional regional plant conservation trends and directly enhance data consistency, capacity, and awareness for plant conservationists. So we really see that as we're able to pull together all of these networks and the different components, that we're going to be able to make really big impacts with this RSGCN list that we're going to be talking about today. Next slide. So the work that is being accomplished and the team that I am extremely fortunate to be able to lead, this is sort of just some of the pictures of everybody that we have. And today you're going to be hearing from Carrie Radcliffe and Sarah Norris. And I'm really fortunate to be able to have such an amazing group of individuals who are working really hard to build networks and to do more for plant conservation in the region so that we can actually make really meaningful impacts. Next slide. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Carrie Radcliffe to let her talk about the Southeastern PCA background and setting the stage for how we came about working towards developing this RSGCN.
Thanks, Emily. I'm Carrie Radcliffe, Conservation Partnerships Manager, and I'm happy to elaborate on the Southeast PCA just to give you a little foundation for understanding how we came to be and some of the other projects we are working on that has led us to be involved in and supporting the development of the Southeast Plants RSGCN. The Southeastern PCA was formalized in 2020 and built upon years of strategizing and networking. As Emily said, our goal is to bridge gaps between local and national efforts, and we do this by building capacity, facilitating novel partnerships, and leveraging shared resources to stimulate collective success for our region. And it really depends on all the amazing people in our region who were already doing work before the Southeast PCA formed. It formed around them, includes them, and relies on their participation and expertise. If you want to visit our website, you can learn more about our strategic planning efforts, which launched it. And I'll talk a little bit about a piece of that in the next slide. You may have also heard of the Southeastern Partners in Plant Conservation conferences. These were events held in 2016 and in 2020 at our Southeastern Center, again, coming together with the most amazing people pitching in to help us plan this from around the region and even at the national level. There were various goals and successes associated with each of these events. And if you would like to learn more about those, you can visit atlantabg.org/SEPCon. And you can also access recordings from most of the presentation from both of those events on the Center for Plant Conservation Rare Plant Academy portal. And we'll talk a little bit about a few other projects before delving into the RSGCN. One of those is us working with the Fish and Wildlife Service Southeast region to improve recovery outcomes for some select species that are listed under the Endangered Species Act. And this sought to help the recovery leads across the region prioritize from their larger set of listed species to select things, to work with partners to implement pilot projects by prioritizing those, promoting region-wide planning for those habitats and ecosystems with all the amazing partners in the Alliance, and to try to get funding and then redistribute funding where it's needed to support not only the projects and the species, but also the partners doing good work for those. The primary objectives include promoting recovery, right? And in cases where we can't do that, we're helping to identify opportunities to prevent extirpation or engage in education and outreach. Secondary objectives had included not only the regional PCA, but also supporting and encouraging the local PCAs and partners in each state, because we're working so hard across the state boundaries. This includes promoting partnerships on public lands and private lands and facilitating those working group discussions with experts. Next slide. So we've actually received funding to implement 4 additional pilot projects this year and next year, but the original 5 pilot projects, which were selected out of a set of 13 species recommended by the Fish and Wildlife Service, can be shown here. These range from Puerto Rico to Florida and elsewhere in the Southeast. And we've also been working with partners to showcase their amazing work in South Florida, the Florida Panhandle, and in Puerto Rico by creating documentaries to bring attention to their efforts, their successes, and their needs to continue to promote recovery and prevent extirpation. Another project we've worked on over the past couple of years was with NatureServe and Botanic Gardens Conservation International US. This was the ex situ gap analysis of high priority plant taxa of conservation concern. And so we worked with them to acquire additional data to upload into their plant search database at BGCI to be able to look at which species and populations of rare plants are or are not represented in ex situ collections. Next slide. We have a really good foundation to build upon. Of course, in the Southeast, we're striving to meet the goals of both the North American and global strategies for plant conservation and have adopted those criteria for ex situ and in situ work from those strategies. And we already have a great head start because of what all the partners have been doing. In some cases, many partners have been doing this for years or decade, not just ABG, not just even CPC, Center for Plant Conservation Network partners. But what we can see is that we have more than half of high priority taxa represented in ex situ collections, most of those actually in Southeastern institutions. A lot of those are also reported by seed banks. So this is an amazing start. And if you look on the next slide, we can start to see where we can improve, and that we want to increase the number of wild origin accessions. So we want to apply those Center for Plant Conservation best practices and enhance our collective conservation inventories to include not only wild origin material, but multiple maternal lines, tracking each one separately to maximize the conservation value of those collections. And we have a head start. And this also utilized a preliminary taxa list that was developed by NatureServe that ended up being the first stab at an early version of the RSGCN list, which we'll talk more about in a few minutes. But we hope to use these data not only to guide our strategic collecting activities and develop meta collections with partners across the region or beyond, but also to meet those North American and global strategies. This is going to help us track our progress through time and hopefully eventually develop a formal strategy for ex situ and in situ conservation for our region and for our network. We also engage in advocacy. We're lucky to be a nonprofit, so we have more flexibility than some of our other partners, and that's how we can help fill gaps in many cases. Combating plant invisibility, everyone on this call knows about this and has been striving to do this in order to carry those efforts further even more that you all have been dedicated to for so long. We joined on the bandwagon. We developed a info sheet that can be shared with other professionals in plant conservation, in native plant groups, and beyond. We also have some material that translates pretty well to general audiences. We sent information like this and a letter along to the new administration when they came in a couple of years ago. And we've also worked with Center for Plant Conservation to develop an advocacy flyer and a couple of different versions of that with different types of photo backgrounds to help engage more supporters and define what advocacy is, because it's really broad and there's restrictions on if you're a nonprofit or you're not, or if you're just acting as an individual. And so that is delineated on this, as well as some proposed legislation. So that brings us to the regional species of greatest conservation need. This is one of our current and most intensive projects, and it is significantly moving the dial forward for plants by creating a product that ties them directly in with all other forms of wildlife. And that's what we want. You know, plants are wildlife too, and they deserve the attention and they need resources. So we're hoping that gets us a little bit further, and it's actually partly an advocacy effort in and of itself. So this is the Southeastern Plants Regional Species of Greatest Conservation Need, also referred to as the Southeast Plants RSGCN, and it is the first of its kind in the nation. I also want to recognize that, you know, Atlanta Botanical Garden accepted funding from the Fish and Wildlife Service on behalf of the Southeastern PCA to support and coordinate this project, which also includes representation from the Southeast Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies Wildlife Diversity Committee. This was John Ambrose until he retired recently. Carrie, Emily, and myself and Sarah at Atlanta Botanical Garden, but also we had to work with NatureServe, obviously, and the Natural Heritage Network of all of the member programs throughout the Southeast that update and maintain and share data. So Amanda Eberly, Wes Knapp, and Misty Nelson from NatureServe. Also, Karen Terwilliger and Tracy Rice from Terwilliger Consulting Incorporated. They developed the RSGCN list for animals in 3 regions and were involved in participating in the planning team and advising the work for this. We also had Alan Weekly, our taxonomic expert and standard and advisor from North Carolina Botanic Garden at UNC Chapel Hill and the author of Flora of the Southeastern US. And again, this was supported by the Fish and Wildlife Service in terms of funding the work. So if any of you are joining us today from the technical team or survey team, we're also going to be having your name shown on a slide as well. And I can't stress enough how much of a collaborative effort that this project was. So you've had time to look at the slide for a few minutes, so I can ask you maybe, why have we worked so hard to make this RSGCN come to life? And I will answer that rhetorical question by just summing up what is on this slide and these amazing resources from the international and the national and regional realms here. 40% of plants on Earth are at risk of becoming extinct. That's a lot. Plants, animals, and ecosystems in the US are facing the same level of extinction and collapse. And 40% of plants lost from North America since the time of European colonization have been from the Southeastern United States. So if you go to the next slide, we'll just recognize again the NatureServe network and their many programs and organizations dedicated to collecting the scientific data about animals, plants, and ecosystems, and their recent report on the state of biodiversity in the United States. They work in the United States and Canada, and again, we worked with those Southeastern member programs, including but not limited to natural heritage programs and state agencies, and all of their botanists, also within the Southeast Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies footprint. And if you go to the next slide, we can learn a little bit about state wildlife action plans, or SWAPs. And this is important to understand because this is another driving force for developing this regional list. These state wildlife plans were mandated in 2005 to be submitted in order to receive funding for state wildlife grants or tribal wildlife grants, and they include species of greatest conservation need, or SGCN list. These are usually animals. Some states do include plants, and SGCN lists in the case of animals are typically rolled up to the regional level to create RSGCN list. That's not exactly the case for plants because not all states are including plants yet, but part of this is that developing a regional list can help inform states about their plans or about their own list if they choose to develop them. And basically these plans are revised every 10 years. So far they've been in 2005, 2015, and a lot of us are gearing up, even if we're not working at a state agency or heritage program or NatureServe member program. It's important because the next revision is in 2025 and we want to be ready so that everyone has the resources they need to include plants. In the next slide, you can see some graphics. These were compiled by Mincy Moffett, who formerly worked for Georgia Department of Natural Resources Wildlife Conservation under John Ambrose, their former chief. Again, John was a big player and supporter of CAFWA and part of AFWA, and also very supportive of the Southeastern PCA. And so they compiled all this information about what plants are included, you know, in the SGCNs, which states include those plants as SGCNs, an alternative form of a list, or just simply a web link with some general information about habitats or plants. So you can see here and on the map, all of the status of the states in the Southeast and the rest of the nation as of the 2015 swap revision. This is going to become more plant inclusive in 2025. And we have some preliminary information from the Southeast Association about who's going to be including plants. And we're waiting to find out exactly what form those are going to be included in so we can develop some updated figures similar to these that Mincy developed a few years ago. So I think you're starting to figure out why it would help to have a plant RSGCN, but I'm just going to spell it out in a few bullets here. Again, RSGCN lists exist already, but only for animals. Those are in the Northeast, Midwest, and in the Southeast. So developing a Southeast plant list is going to complement that Southeast animal list, and that's really great. This is, again, going to serve as a resource for swaps in all kinds of ways, which I already explained. This helps us by communicating our shared priorities between partners. So, you know, we're leveraging and enhancing the Southeast PCA network, NatureServe and their Natural Heritage Network member programs in the Southeast by recruiting experts and having intensive engagement with them and other partners to supplement the data and to prioritize the species, which you'll hear more about from Sarah. But this has helped us communicate our priorities already. We're already putting together funding proposals for different things. Some of that is funding and prioritizing status assessments so that NatureServe can update the global ranks for species, which is incredibly important. This also helps states update their ranks as well. And then we're fulfilling that goal for CAFWA. We're showing them that we are allies. Plant people are here to help you, and all wildlife depends on plants. So it's really a win-win. And then, Sarah, did you want to take over here, or do you want me to go a little longer?
No, I can talk about these next couple slides.
Okay.
So
and let me introduce you then.
Okay.
So just to say again, this is Sarah Norris. She is our Conservation Partnerships Assistant. She is amazing. She was brought on just for this project. She has a background in marine science and conservation. She doesn't have, well, she might now have emotional investment in plants, but when she came on, she didn't. And that really helped us being efficient and rounding up all the partners and dealing with all the information and leading all of the discussions. And we are so happy to have her and for all of her work with our team. Go ahead, Sarah.
Thanks, Carrie. Yeah, so I was brought on to help with this RSGCN process. So I have sort of been thrown into the plant world, and it's very exciting to sort of see this process come together. So what I want to touch on this slide is how the RSGCN list sort of helps us with the standard taxa updates that most states submit fairly regularly. So on the left side, you can see that when states update their internal databases, that gets sent to NatureServe, usually through biotics. NatureServe updates Explorer, and then NatureServe will rank the taxa, update G ranks, S ranks, all that data. And then again, states will update their databases again, and it's a cycle. And so now we have this RSGCN coming in where we can take that ranked list and we can determine the need for which species need updated ranks for an RSGCN. We can do surveys, we can analyze those responses, and then we can reevaluate those species that need updated. And it'll also help, you can see at the bottom here, it'll sort of prompt states to update their databases where there may have been a backlog, just to sort of bring it back to the front of their minds. And so we've sort of seen this cycle work during this process, and we're hoping that it will continue to work in the future. So I'm going to touch a little bit in a few minutes on the survey process, the technical team process, and sort of what this final product is looking like. So we had 3 working groups for this process. We had the planning team, which began even before I came on last January. This started in October of 2021. And so we had this planning team come together. They were sort of riding off of the back of SEPCon 2020, where this idea came together. And we brought in a technical team and a survey team to help us with this process. So the survey team listed here includes botanists from many of NatureServe network member programs, the USDA Forest Service, and US Fish and Wildlife. And then we had a subset of much of the survey team join us on the technical team. And those were, again, some network member program representatives. We had one from each state, so we could represent the entire region. I do want to note you won't see Puerto Rico and the US Virgin Islands on this list. Unfortunately, we don't have enough data to support the species lists from those regions. So we're hopeful that in the future, since we have shown that this process works really well, that we can find funding to supplement data and be able to include those territories in the future. So this is the timeline that we followed. You can see that this started in October of 2021, planning and coordinating. And there were, in total, there were a lot of meetings. We had 16 planning team meetings. We had 4 team meetings for the survey team. We had 5 for the technical team. We had a ranking workshop, an in-person workshop, which we'll talk about. We've had 3 ecological crosswalk meetings so far, and I'm sure we will have more because we're still working on that. And then we've also had 7 grant proposal and administration meetings just to continue this process. So I want to touch really quickly on NatureServe conservation ranks. This is what we based in essentially our entire list off of. We used NatureServe data because there is very high confidence in this data just as it is updated so regularly. I think we know that the animal list, they had about 85% confidence in their data before it was reviewed, sort of the pre-screened list. The data that we went in with the plants list, we think had over 90 to 95% confidence in that data, just because of how frequently these NatureServe network organizations are updating their databases. So when that information goes to NatureServe, NatureServe consolidates the data and they assign global and state ranks, or global, national, and subnational ranks. And that's based on rarity, threats, trends, and the distribution of the species. So you can see an example of what NatureServe Explorer looks like. You can actually go to this website and look at plants, animals, anything you might want to see, and you can see its distribution and its rarity and the conservation status of each of those species in each state that it occurs in. So this is just an example of the outward-facing database that any of us can access, and we actually used all NatureServe's data for this process. So when we came together with NatureServe, they compiled a list for us of all vascular plant taxa. It was over 10,000 species, which is about an entire order of magnitude larger than any animals list has been. That's only usually been like 1,000, maybe a little over 1,000 species. So this was a huge undertaking. And it was great that we had high confidence in this data, even just going in without having reviewed it yet. So like I said, we weren't able to include US territories, but this includes the 15 states in the Southeastern Plant Conservation Alliance and SIAFWA footprint. So we followed their footprint. It extends to Texas, Oklahoma, Missouri, Kansas, West Virginia, and Virginia, and then south. So we have 15 states. And
once the list was reviewed, there were a number of like duplicate taxonomy species removed. We ended up with 9,271 native taxa, taxa that are native to the Seattle region, and those were analyzed and assigned pre-screened levels of conservation concern, or LOCCs. And that's what you see on this list here. These are the different levels of rarity, threats, trends, ultimately that makes these G ranks and these S ranks. And then based on those ranks, these species were assigned a level of conservation concern. So you can see the G1s, the G2s, the more rare species are given very high levels of conservation concern. And then down at low, we wanted to make sure nothing was not an RSGC, there was no species that didn't have a level of conservation concern. Some of them were just lower than others, but I'll touch in a little bit. That'll help us track future changes really well. So at least everything has a rank, except for the species that we just don't have enough data on, and those are the GNRs and GUs. So once we got this pre-screened list in our hands, we formulated some questions and created a survey. This was sent out just as an Excel file with additional columns put in for response options. So we had a team of surveyors that were regional botanists, experts in the field. I believe we sent it out to over 100 people and asked the survey takers to send it out to anyone they know that we might not know that would be interested in helping us with this data. So we added columns to survey asking if anyone knew of G rank updates or S rank updates that needed to happen for these species. Every species, all 9,200 species that were on this pre-screened list were sent out. We also asked if the level of conservation concern needed to be updated, and we asked about threats and needs. And so the responses that we got 30 responses, which was great, and we got at least one from every state in the region. So that was really encouraging to know that we at least had one set of eyes from every state looking at this survey. And so what we found was that at the bottom of this slide, you can see the feedback that we incorporated into this list. Taxonomy updates, still looking for duplicate taxonomy, changes to the level of conservation concern, G rank updates, and S rank updates. So all of that data that we got together, we compiled, and we were able to sort of analyze that data. And additionally, we got information based on the threats that people were concerned about that botanists are noticing, and also what the conservation needs might be for those species. So this was where our technical review process began. That started in May, went through August. We had multiple meetings, Q&A sessions. We had 130 species that we determined were needing technical review, not in person, but hands-on discussion about these species. And those were decided, I'll show you in just a minute the sort of categories that they were categorized in, but those were species that did not have at least a majority vote, in a way, like a consensus from the survey team. So less than 50% of the survey takers agreed on the level of conservation concern changes to make to this species. And that was what we used as our sort of our baseline, was changes to the level of conservation concern. That was what we looked at in the technical team. So this, it might be hard to see if you have a smaller screen, but this is just to show you how many species were gone through and looked at by hand, manually reviewed, discussed. We had great discussions. And like Carrie said, I did not get established in the plant world, so I was the timekeeper. I was the person to make sure we stayed on task to get all these species done. And we had amazing quick discussions. And what we were working with, so these 130 species are in that red section, the highest response priority. So we had more than 50% where when asked if there should be changes to the level of conservation concern, they responded, I don't know. We did put that as an option just so we knew that they reviewed the question and just didn't know the answer to it, if it needed to be higher or lower. We also had 11 where there were 50-50 responses, and then we had less than 50% consensus for a significant number of species. Or I'm sorry, those are backwards. Less than 50% consensus for 11 species, and then 50-50 responses where someone said maybe the level of conservation concern didn't need to change, and someone or multiple people said that it needed to be lower. There were 113 of those where the vote was split evenly. So we went through one by one, had great discussions over 3 meetings in July and August. And eventually, we made decisions for those 130 species, and then the planning team also reviewed and assessed those species and even some additional ones, but those were the primary 130 species that the technical team needed to help us come to consensus on. So once we finished that process, we worked with NatureServe and many of the NatureServe network partners to come together to have this RSGC and ranking workshop. So the project, when we started, we had included funding to assess and update the G ranks for 50 taxa with NatureServe and the network member botanists. So the team blew this goal out of the water. It was a 3-day workshop. They addressed 68 taxa in person, and we had a few people joining us over Zoom. And then during the workshop, some discussions before the workshop, and then we had continuing conversations after if there was follow-up with like one specific state that there was an endemic species that, you know, it was a lot of Florida species, only Florida needed to discuss. In total, there were 71 species that the global ranks were updated for, and 20 of those were species that had never had a rank assigned before. So they did an amazing job and worked so hard over those 3 days. And you can see here what the participation looked like. We had 13 states represented with 27 attendees. We had 2 NatureServe botanists that have been working on this project with us. They sort of led the project, led the workshop. We also had 2 regional advisors joining us from Southeast Flora and SIAFWA. That's Alan Weekly and John Ambrose joined us as well. And then we had 7 states join us in person and 6 were virtual. And then we had additional follow-up from 2 states afterwards. So we had a huge response and an amazing outcome from this project. So once we finished the ranking workshop, NatureServe went to work and updated a lot of the G ranks, updated any data that had come in since we had started this process, just to make sure the data that we were working with was as up to date as possible. And ultimately, we came out with a list of 9,271 Southeastern taxa that were assessed during this process. And 1,824 of those are considered RSGCN species. That's about 20% of the whole list. So we have 697 taxa that are considered very high level of conservation concern, 251 high, and 876 moderate. So we have this huge list of species that are already considered regional species of greatest conservation need. And then we have 6,646 low concern. That doesn't mean that they're not, you know, up for concern or that we should not be concerned about them, but regionally they are lower concern than these other 3 categories. And then we still have 801 where we need to manually review them. We need to get more data and continue to do this work. But it's still a huge result based on the data that we had. So when we look at these species, you can see sort of this visualization here of the number of species by level of conservation concern. And on the right, we have all these additional criteria that we had included during this process. So we, in the list itself, which you can download, it's published right now, and we'll give you the link where you can download it. You'll see different ways where you can sort of categorize this data. We have added taxonomic families to the list, so you can sort by taxonomic family. We have included species and habitat threats. along with conservation and research needs. So those are categorized in there. But we also have additional criteria that we're working on adding and will hopefully be able to update with in the future. So right now we're working on ecological system groupings and the taxa in need of ranking updates, so ones that will be included in ranking workshops in the future. We're hoping to add data about ESA listed and at-risk species, and also medicinal, economic, and culturally significant species. We have tried many times and will continue to try to get funding to create those lists. And we are working with partners as we speak to try to create relationships, especially to create medicinal, economic, and culturally significant species lists, or at least be able to note them within the RSGCN in the future. So I am going to let Carrie jump in on this slide. She's very familiar with a lot of these species, and she's going to just touch on why a lot of these species are in the categories that they're in and what we can look for in the future and why they're unique.
Sure. Thanks, Sarah. So I know everyone here loves plants, so you probably want to know what is on the list. We can't go over 1,800 things right now, so we have selected one juicy item from each category, including the low or not actually RSGCN here. So Venus flytrap, everyone knows and loves this one. It's actually petitioned and under review by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service for potential listing under the ESA. It's in the very high category. It's also tracked by CITES, the Convention on International Trade of Endangered Species, and considered critical for conservation need by United Plant Savers, UPS, who works to help conserve and address species at risk of, over harvest in the wild. And these are one of the groups we want to start including in our network. But very high. So interesting, very high, but not listed. Whereas we have a high Jones's pitcher plant, Sarracenia jonesii or Sarracenia rubra jonesii. This is listed as endangered under the ESA, also tracked by CITES. Another charismatic species. That and our example for moderate and the flytrap are all subject to poaching in the wild. So that's interesting. But for the moderate category, again, this is on the list, but a lower level of conservation concern than the high and very high groups. We wanted to put American ginseng as an example for this one because this is another one that is not listed or petitioned, but the Forest Service Southern region has recently stopped issuing permits until it can be better understood what's going on in the wild. Another kind of side project we're hoping to support with all the partners already working on that in so many ways for so long, because it's going to take a lot to really understand it, but it is subject to wild harvest and poaching for economic trade, primarily via export to China, as many of you know, also tracked by CITES. Our example for the low category was chosen because we don't want to dismiss things that don't fall out on the actual RSGCN. There's many species of cultural significance, for instance, in the low category. So while the rankings and distribution criteria may not qualify them for the actual list, they still need to be addressed. And luckily, river cane is being addressed. It is, sustainably harvested by many indigenous communities, but the habitat for this species has declined, especially where not protected throughout its range. And there is successful collaboration there, including the River Cane Restoration Alliance, and it's even included in the State Wildlife Action Plan for South Carolina. So these don't represent all the species in those categories, but there's some examples we thought you might enjoy seeing. And they illustrate, that basically each category can vary in their protection status, their threats, and we just want to reiterate that no matter if it's on the list or off, we need to work together to continually assess, address, rank, and conserve species, especially if they're not on the list and they have sustainability concerns, or provide an avenue for collaboration with partners.
Thanks, Carrie. So it just goes to show that even the ones that might be in the low category can still be included in swaps, and the very high ones may not be listed in all the places. So just trying to give a relative rank essentially to each of these species and how we can use this tool in other ways. So we're excited to see it included in swaps for 2025. The next thing I want to look at is we did a few different sort of analyses of the RSGCN list. And what we found was that there are 10 families that are the most prevalent on the RSGCN list. Those families are also the top 10 for population in the region, except for the Cactaceae family. That one is more rare than another one. I don't remember which family it was off the top of my head, but these are the top 10 families that we see on the list and in the region. So you can see, for example, the Asteraceae family just far and away has more species and more taxa than any of the other families. And so looking at these, if you look at the RSGCN report, once it comes out, we are going to have a report coming out in August. We will have a discussion of each of these species in these families and why they're unique in where they fall on the list. So it's been really interesting to see these families coming through.
Hi, Wiggle.
Okay, so the last thing I want to discuss here is the threats and the needs that we asked for feedback on the survey that we asked the survey team to fill out. We gave drop-down menus for the top 3 threats and the top 3 needs for each species that anyone gave us feedback on. And so these were the threats that we had looked at. These were our threats, the high-level threats that are actually tracked in biotics data by NatureServe. So they're not, the feedback wasn't present for all species. We had 867 responses for threats though, in the entirety of the survey. So that's about 47.5% of, that's just the RSGCN species, 47.5% of RSGCN species had a response to these threats. So you can see that natural system modifications is the greatest threat according to our survey takers. And it's followed by agriculture and aquaculture, human intrusions and disturbance, invasive and other problematic species, genes and diseases, and residential and commercial development. So a lot of anthropogenic threats that we see in this feedback. We also had asked for feedback on conservation actions that are needed for these species. So these actions were actually identified during SEPCON 2016. These were agreed on categories that were developed to capture multiple activities that could be assigned to species based on what they need. So these categories, we had 3 broad categories: land protection and management, safeguarding and conservation networking, and then monitoring and research. So there were 3 sort of subcategories for each of those. And you can see that land acquisition or conservation easements and habitat restoration and enhancement, in addition to like surveys and inventory and monitoring, are definitely the greatest needs that we see. And so we can see land acquisition or conservation easements sort of going with natural systems modifications as the highest threat. So we really need to work on acquiring this land, preserving this land, and making sure that we're preserving the habitat. Like Carrie pointed out at one of the very first slides, 40% of ecosystems are in danger. So we're seeing this here, that if we can preserve these ecosystems, then we can help preserve the plants and we can help preserve the animals too. So this was really interesting to sort of dive into and look to see what threats and needs are really prominent in the conservation world. So I want to touch on a couple of our next steps, and then I'm going to pass it back to Carrie so she can wrap us up. The SEPCA has developed and proposed this very first RSGCN list for plants. We have shared it with the technical team for review, and they've actually used it in a lot of their swaps already, which is great because we know that those 2025 revisions are coming up. It's also been submitted to CIAFWA's Wildlife Diversity Committee for review. So right now it's actually the proposed RSGCN, but if they approve it, then it will be considered the full RSGCN for plants. And we're really excited about that because there have been 3 other RSGCNs done for animals in the Northeast, the Midwest, and the Southeast. And so if they approve it being considered a full RSGCN, then we will be on par with the animal list, and we can really use this tool to promote conservation in a lot of different arenas. So you can actually find this list at se-pca.org. There's a link where you can see the Southeastern Plant RSGCN. I believe Carrie put a link in the chat directly to that page. And then there's a link where you can download it. It's an Excel file, and it's not totally complete yet. We have some ecosystem information, crosswalks that we need to update. So we will be updating that link later in the summer once we get that information finalized. But Carrie is going to discuss the work that we've done with the Southeast Flora in getting that crosswalk finalized.
Sure. Thanks, Sarah. That was a great overview of the process. As you all can tell, a lot of people and a lot of work went into this, and we're very excited to have it as a resource and to continue improving it and to be sharing it here today. So we have this list. We've developed and proposed the nation's first plant RSGCN list. It's been shared with the technical team, with CIAFWA. It's already being used for ranking updates, revisions of swaps. We're using it to promote long-term conservation goals of imperiled species at the same time with the people that are writing those swaps. We're working on proposals for some of these next steps. Like Sarah was saying, in progress, we have various components being worked out to supplement the available information for ecosystems. So in order for this list to be more efficiently utilized in updating state wildlife action plans, the Southeast Climate Adaptation Science Center is actually supporting a postdoctoral fellow right now through the Oak Ridge Institute for Science and Education, also known as ORISE, their program. And this person was hired by U.S. Geological Service on behalf of CCASC through this program. So a lot of effort just leveraging capability to already be putting next steps into motion using this list. And this person, Alex Loomis, is already working this calendar year to assess climate impacts on rare plant biodiversity for RSGCN species using the list that we have all made together. This project will compile available information for each species about any previously conducted climate vulnerability assessments. It will also identify ecosystems that host the greatest numbers of the rare plant species on the list, right? So this ties into our biodiversity hotspots, particularly for rare plants in the Southeast, and will also translate to some similar efforts that have been conducted for animals in our region. Tying in with this is just the tail end of the final formal list production, and that is Dr. Alan Weekly, our taxonomic standard and advisor, his amazing team at Southeastern Flora of the United States and North Carolina. They are conducting a crosswalk of their available data with the corresponding group and alliance levels of the U.S. National Vegetation Classification System. This is not only going to add information for many more species on the list in terms of the ecosystems and habitats, but it's also going to help Alex by assisting him with downscaled climate projections that inform those ecological groups for the RSGCN taxa. Again, the alliance level, which is a finer scale in the USMVC, that is available in a lot of the species entries for Alan's huge data set. And so that's going to be provided. And this is really driving us forward in terms of, wow, this is where we want to go. Someday we'll have all the alliances defined. We'll have the associations defined. Once we get everything for plants down to that community level in terms of being crosswalked, that is going to be amazing. So with the animal RSGCN lists, for instance, those are typically crosswalked to the macro group level. So that's a higher level of order in the ecological classification system of the USMVC. We're going to have it one step below for everything at the group level, some for alliance, and we want to all work together in the future to go closer. And why is this important? So think back to the state wildlife action plans, think back to habitats, plants and animals, right? We need to define in a standard way the habitat associations for all plants and animals. And you may think maybe that's already done. Well, it's not done in a consistent manner across states, not even for their state wildlife action plans. So the fact that we're realizing now at the end of this project that this effort for plants and everything we do is for plants. So essentially plants and plant conservation is going to be driving the development of a standard way to classify habitats, which supports crosswalking animal RSGCNs, plant RSGCNs, and the individual species of need in each state. And that's going to move the dial forward for protecting all the habitats, all the ecosystems in the wild, which face collapse. And without those, we don't have the plants or the animals in them. So we are very excited about this development and that there is such broad impact in terms of where we can go for this. That is all in progress now to some degree, you know, future finer scale ecological crosswalking, hopefully to be done in the future, but we're already going finer than the animals have been able to go so far. So that is great. We're currently seeking funding also to use the RSGCN list. We've already identified several species that are listed and at risk that have out-of-date ranks, right? So by continuing to work with NatureServe and the Natural Heritage Network and getting funding to share with them because they need it to be able to continue to do those conservation status assessments and rank unranked species, update ranks for species that could be trending toward rarity or not. You know, we have to keep assessing them to know that process for these species that are petitioned or already listed is going to help inform the Fish and Wildlife Species Status Assessment process, as well as their overall national listing work plan. So we do hope to get that work funded more immediately to be able to share that funding to conduct additional assessments with that network that are the gateholders that need the resources to support that work that's part of their mission. Continuing to crosswalk to those finer levels of ecological associations, of course. As Sarah mentioned, we were not able to include Puerto Rico or the US Virgin Islands in this initial version of the list, but these lists are living documents. Like the state wildlife action plans, they're updated every 5 or 10 years. So we're hoping to work within the Southeast PCA network and all the existing partners that we want to lift up with help and leveraging resources and building capacity to be able to help them enhance their data availability and prioritizing species for actions, particularly, you know, priority habitats and conducting monitoring in those sites to update their data and facilitate data sharing so that we can include these Caribbean territories of the US in the next list. So it will be updated. Who knows how long it will take to get there, but within 5 or 10 years, we hope to be able to include state SGCN list as a criteria for RSGCN collection for plants if all states are able to create their own list, as well as those Caribbean territories. And as Sarah mentioned as well, we've been strategizing with NatureServe even since Anne Francis was on with them and Leah Oliver about how we can now with Amanda and Wes that are still there contribute toward, you know, developing some kind of roadmap and strategy for working together at a really intricate level on a large area to support the conservation of culturally significant economic and medicinal species. So we look forward to growing in that regard and increasing our network to be more and more inclusive as we develop our relationships with tribal nations more and bring in the ethnobotanical and economic botany professionals as well. We want to do a lot of things, as you can tell, but the RSGCN is the first step. Again, USGS through CCASC and the ORISE program. This is a slide about the postdoctoral project. You can go to the website there, CCASC at ncsu.edu, and look at their update about this great project that's already launched to address the available climate info and collate that. So basically, Alex is going to be taking available climate model info and crosswalking it to the RSGCN using those NVC groups, right, that translate to the Landfire spatial product that many land managers utilize. Other people utilize it for planning and things as well. And so this will give us a good start on seeing where state wildlife action plans can include the information. He is translating into non-technical language on the known information for these habitats that include the high numbers of RSGCNs, and it's going to make it easier for them to be included by the states in their plans. It's great work. We're so honored they're doing this. And it'll also identify gaps for where we can do more modeling for climate impacts on rare species, right? We'll know where we don't have the data. So additional outcomes, well, first of all, we want to acknowledge our RSGCN project partners again. You can see their logos here, and we'll show them again in a larger format. This is not ABG. This is not even just the SEPCA network. Obviously, this leverages funding that is then shared with the partners that have the experience or the data or the expertise or need support and broad level habitat and wildlife conservation, right? Because that depends on plants, even if they're just talking about animals. And so this addresses that need. We're listing species and habitats with regional responsibility and opportunities for collaboration. This enhances ongoing efforts to be consistent with our data and to make those needed data updates, right? Supporting the swaps, informing project proposals and demonstrating our needs, and promoting awareness and capacity for the conservation of plants. And we believe that because of all of our efforts put together, that our region is serving as a model and a leader in this regard. And we're very honored to be able to create the first RSGCN for plants. And we hope that that inspires other regions to follow suit. I have a small plug here at the end on behalf of not just the Southeast PCA, but our friends at the National Wildlife Federation. Our voices are needed right now. And since I can say this, I will say this here. Unless we enact change, 1 million plant and animal species will face extinction. This is a significant loss that we're facing. You know, all of our networks can serve as models of leadership in their ability to address needs and achieve success in plant conservation. Our collective ability to assess and preserve the biodiversity of plants and ecosystems underlies the sustainable and continued existence of all other organisms, including humans. This is achieved by uniting our efforts in the region, in the nation, and the globe to demonstrate that plant conservation is a crucial asset in conserving the systems that support all life forms, as well as our own well-being. So Recovering America's Wildlife Act was recently reintroduced by the Senate. And if we can reach enough people to get it through Senate, it will go back to Congress, and our state and tribal partners need these resources. Our plants and our habitats and even our animals need these resources. And if you go to the next slide, I believe it elaborates a little bit more, but as many of you probably know, RAWA would be a significant investment in wildlife conservation to those state and tribal partners, providing them with unparalleled support to implement their state wildlife action plans. This includes incentives for including plants in their plans. They'll get a significant amount of additional money if they include plants. And this is another reason why we have been doing this RSGCN thing for the past couple of years, because it will support. We're working with National Wildlife Federation as well to develop a plant conservation specific toolkit for use by all of you and your networks. It's going to be based on the native plant and pollinator toolkit, but adapted for reaching and sharing the plant conservation message specifically, including many beautiful images from the Southeast and the nation at large, documenting the threats and the beauty to the natural world. And hopefully we can all work together. If you are so able, you can contact your senator now through the National Wildlife Federation platform using the QR code here. And we hope to see this happen. We need more support for plants, and we can make a difference. So we have our upcoming events. If you're not on our mailing list, we have information on how to do that, I believe, on the very last slide. But we today are here. On Monday, we presented just the RSGCN content to our broader membership, including the project partners and technical and survey teams. We're going to be presenting this effort as well to the Southeast Climate Adaptation Center SWAP Working Group next Tuesday. We presented to the SIAFA Wildlife Diversity Committee back in March, which was great. We're going to have our NatureServe partners presenting more their their aspect of this work and how it led into the ranking workshop and the amazing outcomes of those 71 species that had rank updates with the Natural Heritage Network at the workshop we held at Atlanta Botanical Garden back in October. So you can get information on joining that and hearing about that great work from them. We'll be presenting on the Natural Areas Association webinar in July. And we're also going to be featuring some of our Fish and Wildlife Service improving recovery outcomes project success in September and November, hopefully with the partners who have been receiving some of the small grants to work on a lot of the pilot species. And we'll also be releasing the documentaries after the partners featured can see them first. And we hope that you tune in for some of these events. We can't acknowledge our partners enough. We truly seek to support these partnerships so that everyone can do what they do best. And then on the next slide, I believe we have logos of the NatureServe Network partners who participated, and the survey and technical team. Again, on the survey team, we also had 2 Fish and Wildlife partners submit surveys and a Forest Service partner submit surveys. And then with the ranking workshop and all of the technical review was conducted with and by these NatureServe Network programs who also supply the data to NatureServe. Please save the date for SEPCON 2024. That will be held in roughly a year and a half from now at Atlanta Botanical Garden. And if you go to the next slide, Sarah, they will see where you can sign up for updates or follow us online to get more information. Thanks for having us today.